Hi there, this is Councillor Glen, and this is episode 3 of Developing Story, kind of an irregular series that my team and I put together to try to give you some extra context behind planning and development in Stittsville. As you know, our community is growing and changing quickly, and I want to give you some insight, I guess, into the behind the scenes and the planning process and how things work. This is a bit of a different episode. It'll be a bit shorter this time. I'm at the edge of Shea Woods, at the end of Cope Drive. So I guess you call it the Westwood subdivision in Fernbank. And I'm here because next week there's going to be some tree clearing operations that are beginning. So first of all, I wanted to give you some information about what's happening. Wanted to give you some information about the financing and who pays for this kind of work and why it needs to be done. And also give you a bit of an update on Shea Woods and the city's efforts to protect and preserve Shea Woods. So first of all, what's happening next week? Well, the city foresters met this morning with Cavanagh Construction to do a pre-construction meeting and understand Cavanagh's plans for the tree cutting. They received a permit for this work way back in July, along with a number of conditions around protection of wildlife. There's a restriction on what months of the year they're allowed to do the work. There's supervision by the city's forestry department. And there's identification of endangered trees and some protection work that they need to do so that they're not damaging anything more than they need to for this particular piece of work. A surveyor is going to be starting, I guess, on Monday and marking the center line of the future Cope Drive right-of-way. Right-of-way is basically the space allotted for a road, the road itself and the sidewalks and any boulevards adjacent to it. So there'll be a surveyor marking that right-of-way center line, and then there'll be some equipment doing some clearing of trees for the space needed to build a trunk sewer. A trunk sewer is a big piece of infrastructure, big piece of sewer infrastructure essentially, and it's going to be crisscrossing the Fernbank area, and it'll allow for more homes and businesses to be built, because obviously you need a sewer in order to have homes. Now eventually this is also going to be part of the future Cope Drive. So if you can think of Cope Drive, it starts on the Cavanagh end of things, crosses Terry Fox by the Fernbank Walmart, if you know where that is. Cope Drive continues west, and eventually it's going to cross Shea Road, and then once it crosses Shea Road, it's going to take a turn to the south and connect with Fernbank. So it's a planned piece of infrastructure that was planned, the route for it was planned as part of the 2009 Fernbank Community Design Plan. So anyhow, work begins next week. It will be done under the monitoring and supervision of the city's forestry department, and we'll be watching this too as it goes to make sure it's being done as per the tree permit. How's it being paid for? Well, Cavanagh Construction is doing the work, and they're doing it on behalf of the home builders in this area. So this whole broad piece of land here is owned by CRT, which is a conglomerate of home developers, Claridge, Richcraft, and Tartan. So those three have kind of partnered for the development in this area. They are doing what's called front-ending the work. So eventually the city is going to reimburse them for the cost of building this trunk sewer. But the developers want to build it now so that they can proceed with some home construction rather than wait for when the city has the money a few years from now in the budget process. So the builders are entering into a front-ending agreement. It means they front-end, they pay for the infrastructure in advance, and then they get reimbursed from the city. Now, it gets a little more complicated than that. How is the city reimbursing them? Well, most of that reimbursement comes from development charges. So every time that a new home is built in this area or really across the city, there's money that goes into a reserve for future projects. So although I say the city is reimbursing them, that reimbursement money, most of it at least, about 90%, comes from a development charge that's added to the price of every home in our area. So it's a bit of a complicated financing scenario, but it's premised on the idea that new growth should pay for growth. So it's the new homes that are ultimately financing the construction of this trunk sewer. So I posted this information on my Facebook page about the tree clearing yesterday, and I saw a few questions that were coming through, so I want to try to answer them. First of all, the Cope Drive corridor is at the south end of the protected area of Shea Woods. The city is finalizing a land purchase from CRT to acquire the north part of Shea Woods, roughly between this future Cope Drive corridor and the Hydro corridor. It's about 5 acres, and it was something that was announced by the previous councillor and the mayor back in 2017, and it's taken this time to get to the point where we're finally finalizing that negotiation of the land purchase, putting all the money together. The city needs to purchase it from the landowner at market value, and it's several $1 million right now based on real estate land costs in the Stittsville area. So it will be about 5 acres that's protected, and the intention is to keep it as a dog walking area as it is now. So a lot of people don't know this, but the existing Shea Woods is private property. And technically, if you're walking there, you're trespassing. I know a lot of us do it. I do as well, often on Sunday mornings with my boxer Roscoe. But right now it's private property, but the city is finalizing a deal with CRT to acquire the forest, which is a very good thing. So that was one thing I wanted to clarify. The second thing was somebody asked, Councillor Glen, why didn't you do more to stop the destruction of the forest for the Cope Drive corridor? I would love to be able to have the power to do that. And there's 2 things that I would answer there, or insights that I would give you. First of all, this whole area of Fernbank was approved in 2009 as part of the Fernbank Community Design Plan. So for me to stop the growth of the trees, I would really need a time machine to go back over 10 years in order to totally redesign the road network. That was set out and decided back then, and that's when the decision was made. The other one is gets a little more complicated, and briefly, the city operates planning under the provincial policy statement. And this is a direction, or I guess a strategic approach from the province that directs how development happens across Ontario. And yes, there is a provision of that to protect significant natural areas and important natural features like forests and wetlands, but there's also an imperative to encourage home growth within or near urban areas, which is exactly what this part of Stittsville is. And of course, there's a balancing between that, but ultimately the province really favors this growth of homes and new housing to meet the demand that we're seeing in Ottawa and in different communities across Ontario. Do I think that there should be more protection and more allocation for green space and forests like this? Yes, absolutely. And it's something that, as a city and as a councillor, it's something that we advocate for at the provincial level. But we have to work within the rules that are here. Now, it doesn't mean that a developer can just come right in and clear-cut forests and do whatever they want. The city does have bylaws and rules and policies and guidelines around how that happens. I mentioned earlier, for example, that Cavanagh needed to get a tree clearing permit in order to complete the work that they're doing here, and there's some pretty stringent restrictions around that. The city also has a strategy to replace trees and forests that are lost. The goal is to plant, I believe it's 250,000 trees a year to regenerate and maintain Ottawa's tree canopy. And yes, it is a loss when we lose some of the older forests and older green space here, but there is some compensation that's being done down the road. And also the city it has been out recently in our area and enforcing these kinds of things. There's a property owner a little further south of here, south of Fernbank, who was charged under the site alteration bylaw for taking down trees without the proper permitting and so on. So it is something the city takes very seriously. I know residents take that seriously as well. Now, there is tree cutting starting next week. It's going to last about a week or 2 depending on the weather. I know it is a popular area for dog walkers, so I just want to ask people to please be careful when you're out walking your pets. There'll be fencing for safety, there'll be signage up, but please be aware of the activities going on. If you have questions or concerns, please email me, and I'll put you in touch with the city forester, Mark Richardson, a great guy to work with, and him and his team with city forestry are going to be monitoring the situation pretty closely. I'll wrap it up there, I think. That's basically what I wanted to provide. If you want to add a comment below with any questions, or send me an email at glen.gower@ottawa.ca. Happy to answer or find that information for you. But thanks for tuning in for this abbreviated version of today's developing story. Take care.